Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is Greenscreens, benchmarking for shipper success with my friend Matt Harding. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great, Joe. Glad to be here.
So, Matt, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Yeah, Matt Harding. I am the CTO of Greenscreens, and I'm calling from my home office, which happens to be New Hampshire. I don't normally keep guitars at my work location, but
I noticed the guitars in the background.
The underground biker today.
So what does Greenscreens do?
Oh, we do a lot. Currently, we have, I would say, 175 plus-ish brokers. That number is always increasing, where we're offering dynamic rate intelligence. And that dynamic rate intelligence is used all over the place. We have user experience logins where they can get dynamic pricing on the buy. They can deal with margins and on the sell. We've got all kinds of business intelligence through applications. We have APIs. We have Java applications where we've integrated with our partners. I think we're up to about 40 partners right now in the technology space. So we are harvesting a ton of data on a continuous basis to create machine learning based market intelligence that helps brokers get to the market rate quickly so they can maximize the productivity, efficiency of their broker teams.
So you mentioned dynamic pricing. Please define that for someone who's not part of that day to day.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. Supply and demand in trucking is driven by many types of influences, right? Obviously, there's the big economic demand. There's the flow of labor in and out of trucking firms. You've got the sort of the owner-operator market, which is generally very small trucking fleets, which is the huge dominant number of companies. You've got the big asset providers as carriers. So as those demand forces, competitive forces work for and against pricing, they tend to move a lot. Any company that has a lot of information about truck prices, they've got to work through data. They get to an answer. The question is, where do you get that into the hands of people that need it? And then by the next day or the next week, it's going to move. So dynamic pricing just means keeping a very close track, maximizing automated scale of machine learning to measure and track what's happening. And for the broker side, I know we're going to talk about shipper a little bit, but on the broker side, we're looking at me as a broker. How do I buy? How is the market buying? How confident I am in that data. So we do a lot of high level machine learning and analytics to make those solutions work really well for our customers.
Yeah. And so I think before we had tools like Greenscreens, if I was at a brokerage, I would have people who were very knowledgeable of a lane and of a market, and they would say, oh, it looks like that's going to be $1,800 for that lane today. And maybe that person had 10 years experience. And you guys said, yeah, if you don't know what to do, Joe, go ask Matt because he's been doing it for a long time. At tribal knowledge, I guess we call it, which is great as long as that tribal knowledge is never wrong. And let's face it, markets change quickly. And humans, we are smart. We have intelligence, but we don't have the same brains as AI or machine learning.
We have very smart customers who really do understand markets. But for organizations that you just look at COVID, where we are now, companies, they can't expand without hiring. And I like to think of our machine learning as a way of having an archived, centralized way of making that information useful for the organization. So where you have seasoned pros that understand the business and the market, we're there to help enhance where they might need information. And then for the folks that are coming in, maybe new to transportation, we want those people to be effective in the shortest amount of time. And then obviously we know people come and go, they leave businesses. We don't want all that information to leave the business because that's the very important component of being successful is having a solid system of information, the ability to put that information to bear.
Yeah. I also think about when that tribal knowledge works, but if I don't care who I am, I like another data point. So if I think, oh, I know what that lane is, I think it should be $1,800. And Greenscreen says, no, you should be paying $50 for it. I might go, oh, okay, I need to reconsider this, right?
Yeah. If you're closing a load quickly, you may be overpaying, right? And so the key is to know where the confidence is and where those loads are. And so that as you're buying freight, you're meeting the market, you're trying to be fair, you're taking care of your partners, but you don't want to have a situation where you're leaving money on the table because of expediency or somebody who wasn't familiar with the market and just got a load covered.
And the markets change so quickly. And again, I hate to even bring it up, but we all lived through COVID. the market changed so rapidly. I told this story before. I had a friend, very large shipper. He called me and he said, Joe, I know we have these contracted rates. And he goes, but I know the market's going to plummet as soon as this COVID thing starts to take hold. So should we go renegotiate those rates? And I was like, I know how you feel. You said that there's a partnership and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, imagine if he went and negotiated those rates. And then 3 weeks later, all those people you renegotiated, they say, yep, your rates doubled. Congrats. But
Yeah, it was amazing. I was obviously part of that in a different role, different company, but it was amazing to me how resilient industry is in the face of that much inefficiency, just from the standpoint of not getting the appointment set on time and backlogs at DCs and carriers not having enough trucks for all the things that were going on. It was quite amazing to see it work. I think a lot of us were somewhat scared at the fact that maybe this is going to be a real economic challenge to deal with. And in the end, it was probably one of the biggest, brightest spots in the in supply chain in a long time. So
yes, it was. So now I know you guys, I've interviewed Dawn and met many others from Greenscreens, and we've always talked about the tools you have for brokers, and it makes brokers faster, better, smarter. It lets them grow without headcount, which is, I think, what everyone's trying to do. And not to replace anybody. It's just to say, hey, can we upgrade what we're doing and take some of the, by the way, sometimes if you don't know what the rate should be, you call 10 carriers. No one wants to do that. So this has made life much better for brokers. Now you guys have a new tool for shippers. Please elaborate.
the core technology, if you think about what we've done for brokers, we've wrestled with, I would think, one of the most volatile, noisy signals in trucking, which is the spot market, right? It's just noisy by design. We would see rates all over the map during COVID, and obviously Greenscreens is born during that time. The idea that core technology is so good at tracking the spot market space, the question we were getting from the market was, we go to these events out there, the conferences and whatnot, and shippers just kept coming to us saying, we want a solution. We want a solution. What are you going to do for shippers? When are you going to do it? So we made the decision to go in that direction. I've spent a lot of time with shippers, probably 25 years of my career. I've been helping shippers with procurement bids, routing and consolidation, TMS implementations, engineering studies, and things like that. So I understand the shipper mindset, and the shipper mindset is about like fairness and market parity. Obviously, there are more aggressive shippers, more service focused shippers. You've got a range of different strategies out there. Sometimes you have two different strategies within the same network. But their problem is a little bit different than a broker, because the simple fact that a lot of these lanes they're trying to manage have lots of volume, for one. And that means either there's a plant on one side or a large retailer on the other that may have a service fines if they're not hitting the on time. And so the risk component is much harder, right? As a broker, you miss a load, there'll be one right behind it. But shippers don't have the opportunity to really create a lot of havoc in their network, because then it leads to pressures from the C-level in terms of, why are we having these issues? And then if you're too aggressive on the pricing and you're going too low to the market, it can create spot and bring a lot of liability into the network as far as risk or insurance requirements or double brokering or theft. These other things happen when you're too aggressive on rates. So it's about contract parity and contract alignment. And so I think when we look at companies we're working with and how our core technology supports the development of market references and baselines, it's going to be amazing. Yeah, so that's the thinking behind it. I think it's an underserved market. I do think that the aspect of a continuous solution, one that's constantly vetting and focusing shippers on the things that they need to focus on, is very much going to be an important part of the industry.
And by the way, when we talk about shippers, I've worked a lot in automotive most of my career. And what I know about that is they expect to know the market price of steel that week. So they can say, hey, why are you charging me so much? Steel prices are down. You're charging me too much for steel. They know every little nuance of what pricing should be, and they demand transparency. And I imagine if I was at a big shipper and let's just say I'm the logistics manager, the logistics VP, and I spent $30 million and you're my boss, Matt, you would say, Joe, is $30 million the right price for last year? And I'd say, yeah, it was. And you go, how do you know? And I would stammer, of course. And then I would say, I don't know, because all I have is maybe a 3PL or a series of brokers I'm working with. And what would be so much better is when I was summoned to your office, if I could say, here's what we paid and maybe some trend lines, and here's what Greenscreens said we should pay. It can show me and then show you, my boss, how we're doing. Because you could ask, Joe, did the rates for trucking go up, or did the rates that you're being charged for trucking go up? It might be two different things.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of solutions out there to help shippers quantify that. But the bigger thing is you have to think about what is the lane, what information do we have on the lane that we need to know, and how does that factor into pricing? And further, there are cases where we talked about brokers understanding the market and understanding the reasons why they pay more or less may not be in the data. So the key thing is when you understand where the general market is, then you can say to yourself, okay, I know this carrier is jumping through hoops for me on a Friday consistently, or we have that 20 load a week surge every springtime, and they're always there for me. And so that carrier may be above the sort of general market rate, but the question is how much? And then as the market's changing, how do you keep that alignment such that the value there is representative of the going rate? So I think there's a lot to it in terms of assisting the decision around who to use and how to make changes to your business, but it can't happen in a vacuum. There's no silver bullet, and machine learning is the best machine learning can do is take the shortest time period and the most amount of information to give you the best picture of what's happening. And then from there, you can build your strategies, whether it's cost focused, service focused, capacity focused. There's many dimensions to that. So that's our aim. And I would say, just to add on to that, if you think about technology and you think about, there's been so much new tech in the broker space, and a lot of this tech is a lot of investment, a lot of startup, and there's a lot of emerging tech that's doing really quite well in the space. And that's driven primarily on the focus of how people are getting through their day-to-day. And it's not this overarching, we're going to replace the world with AI kind of mantra. It's basically, how do we make people more effective at what they're doing so that they can bring the information and the experience they have relative to the tools they have. And so we've done a lot of work partnering with the broker tech, primarily on the SaaS solutions and some of the capacity solutions that we have out there to bring in options. And I do think that there is a open field out there on the shipper side to be able to do that through APIs, through certain types of applications. That we have cases now where the technology is not even ours, but they're bringing green screens into view for the user because they don't want to go through two separate apps. So there's also that element of trying to figure out where the least amount of steps and the least amount of clicks and the least amount of time it takes to get to an answer. And I think that's the promise of tech. But someday we all may be unemployed, and a large AI entity in the sky will run all of our dreams, and we'll be idle and totally wealthy at the same time. But I think there's still some work right in front of us that we need to address. And I think there's a lot of opportunity on the shipper side, because what we're hearing is they're somewhat underserved in certain regard. So.
Absolutely. So Matt, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the juggernaut that is Greens.
I'm from California originally, grew up there, and I left to Georgia at an early age to attend Georgia Tech.
Nicely done.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I was actually there during the Olympics. There was some of that floating about with the Paris Olympics. Then I moved to Boston, and I got to meet some of the giants over at MIT, Professor Yossi Sheffi, a big part of my
he's
career.
been on the podcast. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so I got to meet all of them and do my grad school at MIT for Masters of Logistics and Engineering. And so I had some very fortuitous right place, right time kind of things. And then I've just been in transportation ever since. And it's really been great. I love the industry, a lot of friends and a lot of experiences. And so I happened upon Greenscreens. They were startup, they were growing. And I had friends that said, you should really go look into them. They are doing things that you might be a really good fit for. So I had a conversation with Don, and the rest is history, as they say. I'm almost up to my first year with the organization.
I know my nephew is getting ready to go to college in a few weeks, and he wants to be an engineer. And he looked, and I remember, by the way, I'm glad my kids are out of college because it's gotten crazy. But I remember him saying, and his dad saying, the number one school for engineering is MIT. The number two is Georgia Tech. And I think he was waitlisted to MIT, which is incredible. And then he was going to go to Georgia Tech, but he decided to stay home and go to U of M. But those are great schools. And so you've been to some of the best schools. And I glimpsed at your LinkedIn. You worked at a lot of the early freight tech companies. That's the O of that genre.
Yeah. Back when a client server was a thing. Yeah. I don't even think the internet had just started in the late 90s. So I can remember working with the Sabre Group, which was pre-logistics.com, pre-Manhattan Associates, but they were focused on operations research, modeling to minimize costs subject to these constraints or to assign drivers to loads. And the math is super elegant in these models. It just is. They're hard to explain, hard to understand, but they were doing the real world work in logistics to bring those solutions to bear and actually saving companies money. And I was just so impressed by that you could make all of this beautiful math work in industry. And so I wanted to be the client facing kind of consultant analyst to help with those projects. And it was just a really fun time. Pre-AI, pre-ML. We did a lot of, we called it regression and statistics at the time. Now it's all called AI, I think, but I can't keep up with the terms. But yeah, so we did some interesting things there, benchmarking with bid data and some really interesting work in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's just led this every year. We seem to be stepping into more interesting things. It's crazy.
Yep. I want to get back to our topic today, which is Greenscreens, benchmarking for shipper success. And so you've got this new solution. But first, I want to get back to when somebody says dynamic pricing, you're taking data from where to create that dynamic pricing. And so if I'm a customer of yours, I'm a broker, are you sharing my data with other people, or how's this work?
No, our contracts are ironclad, and it would not be us for anyone to see anyone else's data. So our technology is very much buttoned down. The broker solution is entirely separate from the shipper solution. Neither shall the two mix for any way, shape, or form. The technology stacks are different. The databases are different, et cetera, et cetera. So the key there with the data is that once you create a model, and that model, like in the case of the broker, it reflects their network, but it also reflects the broader network. Then they can integrate through various means to serve their business. And then same on the shipper side. Brokers like to have accuracy to the market very quickly in terms of, okay, this load is $1,500 and we can book that with confidence. We don't need to wait another 4 hours to get a better rate. That's a good rate. The shipper side, they want to see the variances, right? They want to know where they're overpaying, because you don't really get a lot of feedback when that happens. If you're paying, just imagine you're paying some exorbitant amount, 200% over a current lane rate. Nobody really does that, but let's say you were doing that, you would draw capacity into your network.
Yes.
People would be there. Everything would be on time. They'd stage trucks, and it'd just be like, you'd be an oasis in a tight market. So you don't get a lot of feedback when you overpaid. And that's when the market's slipping away from you. And so when you underpay, it creates other issues because the capacity you need may be put somewhere else because the carrier is like, I'm not getting enough. Other opportunities out there, I can get more. So it introduces a lot of risk, potential for liability, theft, fraud, all that stuff. So the key for the shipper is the reason why dynamic pricing makes so much sense is because they need to know from where the market was to where we are. What are the expectations they can communicate to the C-level? What are the expectations they can commit in terms of service and capacity to the customers? And then how do we get credit for the alignment process? It's not so much about reduce costs at all costs, because you go too far and actually add costs. So there's a bit of a balance there, a dual optimization. You want your TMS to function and be productive, right? So if you have a route guide and a TMS and you're tendering loads, you don't want those loads to be untendered or create secondary work, because most shippers don't have enough people to handle all that additional work. We saw that in COVID. So you want the TMS to be effective, but you don't want to pay twice the rate to make that happen.
So Greenscreens also, it plugs right into your TMS. So it's not some separate, I'm sure there's many ways to use it, but I don't have to interrupt the way I do my business.
I got a TMS from the brokers, from the shippers, separate TMSs, separate data models, but the data comes from their system of record for managing the execution of that shipment. For shippers, it's order to cash. You have orders, you select the mode, the carrier, tender it out, get it covered, and then you've got freight payment at the end, all the status and tracking that goes with that. And with the brokers, it's a financial system to get those loads covered and get loads booked and assigned and billed.
So if I'm a shipper, I'm just wondering how this works. If I'm a shipper and I say, would Greenscreens tell me what I would normally pay for that? And then what the market normally pays for that? How does that work? Do I get to see that potential delta?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's all. It's really the point there, and it's not so much the point for every lane or every shipment. It's what does that mean strategically as you start looking across. So the uses are quite varied. If you let's say you have a receiver or a customer that has poor dock practices, right, and you know that your rates are higher than the market, you can conclude, and your carriers will tell you this too, because they're very open about it, where there's inefficiency. But where those two things line up and where your rate is being impeded or impacted, if you will, from a lack of performance in some level or lowered productivity, you'll see that in the data. So there's a lot of things you can do with the data to assess sort of an A/B test to say in aggregate, here's a basket of lanes, or here's a basket of providers, or here's a basket of customers or locations. The benchmarks are very useful in culling out different signals from those actual transactions that are feeding those aggregations. So they can be very helpful to have discussions about improving efficiencies and saying, hey, the market's offering this, but we can only get that. And these are the things that we think are driving it, can help you triangulate.
I think of those. I think that's so true. What you just said there is we can have some conversations. I always say data, we're not creating data for the sake of data. It's the beginning of a guided conversation rather than me saying, I should pay less, Matt, and you say, no, you should pay more. No, let's have data in between us and say, what is the market and what should I be paying? And I think now we're being inundated with data. So I want to be able to have the data that actually guides me to making better decisions, not just loading me up with tons of data. And I go, okay, great. I've got 16 spreadsheets worth of data, but no knowledge.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've seen a lot of that in my career.
That's it. It's funny. I've said this before on my podcast. When I was still working in automotive or when I was at a logistics company, I would always say, I want key performance indicators and I want 4 or 5, right? So cost, metric, on time, whatever those 4 or 5 are. And those 4 or 5 will, if those are going well, the other 30 that I might track are going to be pretty good. They're going to align to that. But now with companies like Greenscreens, there's a model, and that model isn't limited like I am with this small little human brain. It says, no, give me all 30, give me all 30 fields because we'll use all of them. And I think that's why AI continues to get better day after day. And if I could just add this in, we all as humans say, I'm going to continuously improve every single day. Your models do. That's the nature of machine learning and artificial intelligence. It doesn't make a promise in its journal. It does it.
It's providing that North Star, right? That alignment. There's an alignment value there. And then where there's a judgment, a long time ago, I did a survey with shippers and we asked them, at what point on a lane do you take action if the benchmark is above a certain percentage? Let's say, or below a certain percentage. So let's say you're 30% above the benchmark or 50%. What does that trigger, right? Conversation? Does that trigger a wait and see or an assessment? And it was really interesting how we also asked the number of years you've been negotiating with carriers and how long you've been doing that. And the results between the more seasoned managers and the newer ones were completely skewed. And we never thought the age would matter. But basically, it was the longer you'd been in the industry, the quicker you were to act to information, which I thought was interesting. So if you've seen information and that market information is giving you guidance, then the managers and directors and folks that have been in the business for a long time were more inclined to act faster with that information, which I thought was unusual finding, but that's what you do as you get older, right?
Yep. I'm thinking about what shippers do. And I can say this as having worked in a 3PL and also at a carrier and also been a shipper. If they don't know if somebody says, hey, are you paying too much for that lane? And you don't really have a sense for it as the shipper, you don't have green screens at that point. What they sometimes do is they check the market and they'll ask 3 or 4 other carriers. And by the way, it seems we've got quite the gossip in this business. So as soon as you start market testing your carriers, they hear about it. And also, I've been at a broker and a 3PL and at a carrier when somebody says, hey, Joe, would you give us some prices for these lanes? And then your first thought is, am I going to win this business or are they just going to market test their carrier? So sometimes they will do I asked three other 3PLs, three other brokers to give me the price for these lanes. Now I'm going to go back and negotiate with my incumbent, who I like. And I think that is, you're wasting a lot of people's times. And by the way, I've asked as a favor, I don't think you can win this business just yet, but would you do us a favor by giving us this pricing? They're very reluctant because they've been burned. Nobody wants to waste time on business that they can't win. And it's a little deceitful because you think I might win this business, but you're not really being considered. All they're going to do is use your information to negotiate the rates down with their incumbent. If I get Greenscreens, I don't have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of noise that comes out. I also think that there's other areas in the supply chain that need like a market rate, a fair rate. And when you look at sales quoting, here's the product cost, here's the landed price, right? Here's the price if you want to pick it up. Here's what it will cost if we ship it. Get a lot of requests to transportation professionals for that type of information. So giving them a user experience where they can confidently quote what's in the market, not knowing if they're going to win the quote for the product, the sale, that's super helpful. Network design projects where you're trying to figure out, okay, we're going to have an acquisition or a new distribution center, and you don't know what the rates are for that market because you don't have a facility there. It can be very helpful for that. A lot of manufacturers and retailers will arm wrestle over prepay versus collect. And so just understanding, okay, if we've got good rates on here, maybe this is something that we want to maintain control over. There's a lot of things that factor into that alignment, but you don't always know what the rate is if they've been picking it up. And so having that prepay collect discussion in terms of how those costs are being allocated into the product can be very helpful as well. So yeah, carriers get asked for a lot of data, a lot for no reason that will benefit them. And these types of solutions take the burden off of them as well, just from a standpoint of doing more planning and engineering type work.
Man, if we were at a big shipper, you and I, and we were in charge of that spend, and it was significant, I think the way we might decide to work with our carriers, let's just say we're very happy with our carriers and we notice, hey, we're paying 5% more, 2% more than the market, but we're really happy with these guys that we have. If the market price, according to the Greenscreens, goes up a little bit, and we might talk to them and say, okay, the market went up, and we're all going to have a monthly or a quarterly review of that. And when the market goes back down, I don't want to constantly renegotiate with brand new people who might not understand how we do business. I say this all the time on the podcast. When you pick partners, you're not dating, you're not engaged, you're getting married to those, so vet them. But I think that also means don't start going around them looking for market checks from other carriers. Now there's a better way.
No, you're spot on. I do think there are very opportunistic shippers out there that are constantly in the market. And I think all the carriers know who they are.
Yep.
And shippers that are very much committed to the contract. And if we want an annual rate, that's the expectation. So I think where the market rate intelligence is very useful is when, let's say the market does shift significantly in the favor of the carrier. I don't think the shipper is going to just let his carriers know that, hey, we see a market shift. But if the partner comes back and says, listen, we've got trouble. I'm getting pressure to put these trucks on another account. I don't want to do it. I love working for you. At least you have some guideline as to what's a reasonable adjustment.
Yes.
Yeah. Because the other thing is, no, we have a bid. You have to wait another year. And that carrier may not have that option because it's a sales rep competing with other sales reps for that capacity. So you have to have some voice of reason, I think, in the equation to manage and mitigate against those things. But long term, if you are a strategic shipper and you honor your contract, then you can say that will be a decision you have to make. And then next year, we would have given you the opportunity to true up. So some are hyper disciplined, I've seen, and try to keep that at bay. And then others are constantly looking for the best rate. And it really just depends on your customers and your business strategy and how being very opportunistic, you're going to feel a tightening market a lot faster than some shippers, no doubt.
Before we hit record, you and I were talking about how we might use this. And I mentioned that in 2010, 11, I was at a 3PL and we were saving a company, one of our customers, a ton of money. It was on less than truckload shipping. And we would meet weekly to discuss this. And they would go, oh my God, you've saved us so much money. Hugs through the Zoom call. And I started feeling really ill at ease because the market always changes. So I started saying, the wind is at our back. Yes, we appreciate that you like us and that we're doing a good job, but in next quarter, the quarter after, the rates are going to go back up. And I think that's some of the challenge. And by the way, no one wants to, when the glory is coming, no one wants to throw it off and say, no, that's not for me. But the market always changes. And I think if you want the long-term relationship, you say, let's agree that the market goes up and the market goes down, and we're going to give you the best price for that market. And we will go up and we will go down, but we don't always have to go out for bid and us risk a big chunk of our business. I like the idea of saying, I work with the same people, whether I'm the shipper, the broker, the 3PL, I want those 10-year relationships.
Yeah, they matter. And they matter when you need it most. And I think that organizations have different levels of experience around trucking and supply chain. And for those that see it as a cost center or they have a heavy procurement strategy, you can keep cutting and then you find out you've cut too far. Most of the professionals I've worked with over the years, it's about managing the alignment of what the C-level is expecting versus the cost and capacity and service that the customer is expecting. Those two always don't go in alignment, right? So the customer want their supply chains to function, and they want the lowest cost. And it brings pressures from all sides. Some of the best relationships I have in the industry was just, as you were talking about the line, is just showing that the variances that you're experiencing in your finances when it comes to freight expense is a market effect. It's not the people are managing this the best they can. It's a hard time. But if you're able to show and juxtapose me versus the market in a very clear way and have a good solid methodology for doing that, your customers will thank you for that, even though they're experiencing inflation and other pressures because of the end. But you're right. It's feast and famine. It's about alignment. Not every carrier's network stays the same. You can't introduce empty miles into their network just because. So you've got to constantly figure out like where the strengths are. How do these providers differentiate? Everyone thinks that it's a commodity, but if you're going from 10 to 20 to 40 loads down to 5 loads a week, there are some carriers that can do that. And then there's others that would just wilt under that demand. Letting that capability is really important.
So you'll give me as a shipper what I've been paying because you have all my data, but you also have the aggregate data that's all anonymized. So I can say, oh, I normally pay $1,800 and the market's a little lower than that. Why am I paying more? And you might find out maybe just from talking to carriers and talking to your we have a longer than average wait at our dock, or we have appointments that are required. There's something that might be driving our costs higher because there could be two shippers side by side with very similar freight who are getting a different rate because of some other little dynamic.
The carriers obviously know that, and any carrier worth its salt knows how much time is affecting their business, and how much empty miles are affecting their business, and delays on dwell. And being able to put that against a me versus the market assessment is the first step. I'm trying to figure that out. In some cases, the docks, DC is only running from 12 to 6, and that's it. And the congestion and the timing, or you have a 4th of July weekend and people are off and there's peak demand for sugar water, things like that. So you've got dynamics there that are addressable, and some are just like it's a feature of the business.
Right.
But the benchmarking is the first step to figure out, given what the market's paying for this move, all things considered, what are the factors driving the value or lack of value in your business?
Yeah. And I think if you don't have this, we might be using historical data. Is that how, if I don't have some sort of measure or some such tool like Greenscreens, I go, last year I paid this much for that, which might mean very little this year.
I could tell you that the last 4 years, last year didn't matter.
Exactly. By the way, if you think about it, and this is always the challenge that the whole industry is fighting with. At the beginning of this year, a lot of people thought, beginning of 2024, the market is going to start upticking. So everyone's going to pay a little more for trucking. And all the carriers and the brokers were like, oh, please let that be. Now it's looking, well, maybe that's beginning of 2025. Who knows? None of us can time the market, but if you were asked to give a price for a year out, it's very difficult. But I think if we have a tool like this, we can start saying, hey, can we make an agreement around the data as opposed to around my future guess about the market, which no one has a real good sense of.
Well, we have machine learning index based pricing into the future on the broker side. It's in our roadmap, and we've been working with customers on that. Some of the ways that we go and validate that is as we took a history of bid activity and said, okay, if this was your bid, how close was it to the reality of those shipments on those lanes? And then can machine learning add value there? And the answer is yes. You can make an improvement. Now, the daily algorithms that are going towards the loads and the lanes, those are very accurate. We're sub 10% margin of error on spot and less than half of that on the shipper side for the contract. So the accuracy factor is super high. But when you start looking out, like you said, 3, 6, 12 months, you can do the best to corral information that might be economic in nature or supply in Class 8 enabled data and things like that. And it'll give you a sense of where things are shaping up. But the noise on that's going to be a little bit higher just as a result of trying to see into the future. And as we know, we can't predict our election. We can't predict interest rate policy at the Fed. And there's a lot of information that's not readily available that factors into that. But nonetheless, needs there. And if the tea leaves are blowing east or west, that's still an indicator of what our trained information is providing. So
I keep thinking right now we used to do these yearly RFPs, requests for pricing, right? And my friend Andy used to call it request for partnership because that's what we're looking for. And again, I lean towards that. Just reading the tea leaves, it seems as if a lot of companies are now doing quarterly bids because we have some technologies that are allowing us to do it much faster. I could almost see if you're really happy with your carriers and you said, hey, we're paying 1% over this trend line that we got from Greenscreens. I want to continue paying 1% over. So the market goes up, I want to pay 1% over. If it goes down, I want to pay 1 cent. So if you got real happy with your carriers, why have that big upset all the time? Just say, hey, we're gonna develop something that makes sense for both of us. Because I want win relationships. I don't want to drive my carriers out of business. I don't want to drive my brokers out of business.
Yeah, I think so. This is really interesting because this has been talked about for probably all of my career in terms of having some form of an index or some form of adjustment. In the early days, there was like the producer price index. Now we've got all these. Now we have so much information; it's like everywhere. So I think the trouble is that when organizations provide incentives to transportation leadership, and they have it in the form of budgets and hitting your target, there's an element of you need to predict what's going to happen because all of these other downstream effects need it. And the willingness to let things float, I almost feel like it's the shareholder model that makes that really challenging because that flexibility is not something that organizations expect. They want certainty. So maybe that will change, right? As the data gets better. We've heard about the Fed. Okay, their models are too slow. They should be come into the 21st century on your tracking. And there's an argument for that. But I don't know. I don't think the constraint is people in transportation trying to do good by their partners. I think that's well understood. I think it's how the rest of this organization and leadership looks at an expense that's not committed to.
You said something at the beginning of our conversation, which I really like, which is paying too much over market is bad, but paying under market is bad in the long run because it's going to catch you. You're going to find somebody having to cut corners with your freight.
Yeah, I had a discussion probably 10 years ago with a major shipper. Won't say who it is. And they had wed themselves to a carrier, probably $30-40 million a year in revenue for that carrier. And they made the decision that that relationship was not where they needed to be, and they had to dig out of it. So my question was, how long did that take? And it was like eight to 12 weeks of fairly risky transition to find partners that were large enough to handle it. Secondly, deal with all the risks in the transition to keep the business functioning. But yeah, so you don't want to be in a situation where you have a lot of freight expense in one provider, and you've done such a masterful job of leveraging that rate down that if there is a change to that relationship, the business is really in a tough spot.
Yep. I got one question here I want to ask you. It's a big one, but I'll ask it anyway. So talk about the future of tech in regards to both shipper information and data like we've been talking about, and also for brokers. So what's the future hold for all of this?
I think if you look at the broker space and how much tech investment has been there, it's been so much easier to integrate into these newer systems. And we integrate in some of the more legacy systems as well. But I think shippers are going to have more options for intelligent analytics. I think they're going to have options. Certainly, that's a big milestone for us, or at least North Star for our business. And just the idea of interconnectivity, linking the markets, linking root cause, decision making, being able to pull levers more quickly, and being able to see the information you need to see, right? So we've gone through this sort of evolution of data's everywhere. And then you have this explosion of Tableau and business intelligence and more things you can click on than you have time in the day. And now the question is like, how do you take that and extract what's important and be really important about creating information or getting information that maybe is not prevalent from all of this work? Because if you think about it, like TMS and all these systems, they're basically financial systems. They're not built for machine learning. They're not built for all these advanced analytics. They're built for querying and creating charts and graphs, but it's not like there's this intelligent enablement across the data. So I've seen in my prior job, mostly SVP of data science and analytics at Uber Freight, large organizations all getting around information, and the consistent theme is we need this data to be actionable. So then the question is, what actions do you want to take, and what information would premeditate that? How do we isolate that? And I don't think that answer's been fully, maybe with some of the providers out there, obviously not visibility to everything, but I do think that sort of productivity enhancement relative to levered information is going to be where it's at. And having a track on the market, shortest cycle time possible to get insights, customized modeling for each individual player, harvesting and deprecating and validating, updating those models at scale is not easy to do. But I think that's where the future is going. And it's part of the reason why we've been so successful on the broker side, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not about a model, it's about the problem they have. So
every time I talk to a broker, they're either getting green screens or talking about getting green screens. I've called it, since the first time I talked to Dawn about it, I've called it the killer app. And we used to look, and she said this to me years ago on the podcast, which was, she worked for all the transportation management systems. And she said, you have these 7 or 8 functions that you're working on. And she said, and we used to just think of it as a closed system. But now when we look at a TMS, we look at it as an open system that gets these killer apps that can be attached to it. Maybe it's a freight fraud security integrations. These are all integrating through APIs now. So I guess it's not really an integration, not like the 10-week, $100,000 ones everyone's had back in the day.
Well, and it makes sense though, right? You think about the investment needed to invest in a very tight sphere of focus. If your application does one thing better than anything off the shelf TMS or a big provider, if that's all you're investing in, you're going to be able to be very deep with that tech. And then the interconnectivity makes it available to everyone. So we don't have to be everything to everyone, right? That's the death spiral, right? We do one thing extraordinarily well, and that's where all of our energy and focus is. And that's where I see, to your point, the openness of these pieces that fit into the ecosystem, that's going to continue to expand. And I think it'd be lower cost. Think about upgrades and some of the other things in tech that just cost so much money and so much time. That open tech is a real game changer.
It reminds me of how WordPress is. WordPress is the framework. WordPress, doesn't care if you want a calendar plugin. They have 30 different companies that'll provide that. You get the ratings on them all, and it plugs in seamlessly, easily, and usually just with, hey, just here's the key. Here's the key. Put your credit card in, pay for that plugin if it costs money, and away you go. WordPress doesn't look at all those apps that plug into its ecosystem as competitors. They say, no, we're all cooperating. And I think that's how transportation management systems, at least the newer ones, are all configured. And I think even the older ones now have built in an integration layer that allow killer apps like Greenscreens to plug in really easily.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch.
So if a shipper is listening today and says, yes, Matthew Harding, I need this, What does that process look like after they get connected with Greenscreens? Walk us through that.
We have right now where we're at is we are working with shippers through proof of concept, and we have our first release coming up. So we're still in lifting this thing up off the ground. I don't want to sound like we're selling a finished product here.
If you're listening in 10 weeks, they might be finished.
It might be finished. Yeah. So this is, by the way, like the end of July here. By the end of this year, we'll have additional product and release. And you can think of it in terms of looking up rates, batch, business intelligence, APIs. So all of our development is bringing that to bear, and we're not doing it in a vacuum. We have people that have been very helpful and that we're working with. So these are forward statements, but this is the plan. If a shipper would want to work with us, we would share the template that we have. We have multiple ways of receiving data, APIs, SFTP, email, extract, whatever. We try to get out of a manual world. We'd want it at least a day, every day. And so shippers provide us that data. Once that's established, then there is the onboarding, which is our customer success team is phenomenal. They work through all the training, all the support, all of the understanding. Each customer success rep is assigned to an account. So it's the same person, same connection, same understanding. And then really you're there to use the information and be aware of all the things that we're enhancing and releasing. And we send updates and all that. So it's a fairly low lift to get started. And yeah, like if I look at the broker side, we're onboarding dozens or up to dozens a month. It's very efficient. And we anticipate all of that will be the same for the shippers.
Yep.
So,
and the broker side is not new. They've been doing it for years now. And again, I think it is every other broker I talk to is using a tool like Greenscreens, just because I feel like it's, again, getting back to it, it makes you faster, better, and smarter. It allows you to, everybody's right now is struggling a little bit in the brokerage space and saying, how do we do more with less? And even when market turns, we're not looking to be fat and happy then. We're still looking for technology to allow us to grow without necessarily growing headcount, because that's what's required right now.
Yeah, we're all due for a rebound, no doubt.
Yeah. So I won't, yeah, hopefully soon. So I'm going to summarize, then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to my friend, Matthew Harding, talking about Greenscreens benchmarking for shipper success. And again, it's talking all about the shipper solution that Greenscreens is piloting right now. Is that a right term to use? And so if you're listening 10 weeks from now, call. You don't have to worry about the pilot. It is full on. But brokers, it's working right now. We talked about so many of these challenges that shippers have. When you're a shipper, you're trying to get the very best price. But if you're working with a broker or a carrier, you don't know whether you're overpaying unless there's some sort of market tool that tells you you're paying 5% too much or 5% too little, or you're exactly right. And if you're going to manage those relationships properly and stop bothering the rest of the market with your market checks, and you need a tool. And again, I believe I come from the big company world where I can see a vice president asking, did the market go up or are you just paying more? And I would have to say, I don't know. I would like to have that trend line that says, no, boss, it is the market went up. That's why I'm paying more. Or the market went down. I'm not always a hero. I think it's important to tell the boss you're not a hero when the market goes down. But anyway, we need something that is objective other than just what our partners told us. And again, I think a good relationship begins with data to have that conversation around, rather than just say, I always want to pay less and you always want me to pay more. Wouldn't it be better if we had some trend lines and some data that says, here is the right price? Anyway, lots of data, not necessarily all of the guidance and knowledge that we need. That's what I feel like tools like Greenscreen is giving to me. I don't have to get by on tribal knowledge anymore, or my best guess putting my finger to the wind. So anyway, enough of my blather. Put a big old bow around this one, Matt Harding.
First of all, thanks for having me. This has been terrific.
Thank you.
Love hearing your stories and your experience. It sounds like we've had some common turf that we've covered over the years. I'm thrilled for the future. I'm thrilled for the amount of the innovative force really that is Greenscreens. Just a fantastic culture fantastic product. I can't remember being at a company where the customers raved so positively about what you do and genuinely mean it. It's a fun environment. We still have our challenges. We still have work. But it's just a super organization, and really look forward to helping the shippers. I don't envy their jobs. They're always under scrutiny and skepticism, and it's very hard to align and find partners. And we just want to make that job a lot easier and give them the credit for what really is a very difficult job. It's changing all the time. There's all sorts of risks that can enter the business. At the same time, you got to manage the store and make sure that you're doing right for the company as well as your partners. And so really look forward to what we're going to bring to the market. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm excited too because, again, I do talk to a lot of brokers who are using Greenscreens. I've made some introductions to friends. And it's funny because if I've said this before on the podcast, I think I had one of your customers on my podcast talking about it. And they said, yeah, when you like it within a week, since it's AI, it's getting better. So if you like it the first week, you're going to love it in the first month because it's getting better every single day. And I think I've said to people when I'm talking to them about technology, especially stuff like artificial intelligence, machine learning, is it's going to be so much better in a year. The solutions you'll have in a year that they don't not even considered yet. That's just the nature of the technology.
I'll tell you, it's funny. You talk about customers that sing our praises. The one thing I hear over and over again is our ability to validate our accuracy within those predictions. And one element of the culture at Greenscreens, which is really great, especially when you're with AI. Anyone with tech out there will tell you that it's loaded with AI. Some of it's true, some of it's not. We are very transparent in terms of what the system's doing. It's not easily understood. We get questions sometimes. So does your model do this or this? And it's, how deep do I want to go with this person to explain like the complexity of very deep data science in terms of how we select shipments and create the model. And oh, by the way, it's our IP, right? So we're not going to tell the world how we do it, but we're very transparent, irrespective of the complexity of the methods, to say, this is what we're doing for you. We're tracking and monitoring this. It's part of the relationship. And if we see something that doesn't look right, we're going back to that customer and saying, hey, we're noticing something in the data. Is there something we need to filter out, or what's happening here? So we're very proactive when it comes to the expectation and the commitment of what the AI is supposed to be doing for those customers.
Right. That just reminds me, I know we're supposed to be wrapping it up. I have one other question. I was at Manifest last year, as was the Greenscreens team. And I remember I had a long conversation with Sharm about dirty data. And a lot of people are saying, oh, yeah, we're using AI. And one of the challenges with using machine learning AI is that there is an input. And if you input a whole bunch of dirty data, and I remember him talking about, he said, we've got an expert at cleaning up dirty data, because we used to say it all the time, garbage in, garbage out. But I feel like when we're talking about AI or machine learning, that's garbage in, garbage squared, right? So I know you guys have got an expert. You've called it filtering, but we got to filter out all that dirty data, because people who create TMSs will always say, we can do this, we can do that, and with all the systems capable. But the problem, I think, the weak link sometimes is humans input that data.
They finger it in incorrectly, or too many zeros, or not enough zeros, and you have to find ways to prevent the human element of data entry from leading to uncertainty in your modeling, no doubt.
Just a matter of time for that. The systems are going to say, no, human, you're too stupid to put information in our Wi-Fi system. Anyway, Matt, I know you guys are going to be at all the conferences. So I wrote down a few. We were talking to Celine before we hit record. Manifest, which is February. I think you guys will be at Trimble, which is in September in Vegas. You'll be at the Broker Carrier Summit. I think Dawn also is on the board at Don Salvucci Fabio, the CEO, is on the board of Broker Carrier Summit. Bitfreighter, McLeod, I'm sure I missed a few. You guys are going to be everywhere we are.
Yeah, great. We'll have to connect in person.
I met the whole audience. So if you want to find the fine folks from Greenscreens, there will be all the conference, but I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile. a link to your website, and any other links you and your marketing team give me. I'll make sure I put those in the show notes so we can reach out and talk to you guys.
All right. Sounds great, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.